Had she given a statement before that?
Yes, sir, to law enforcement.
I beg your pardon?
To law enforcement,
right.
She did. Yes,
So
sir.
there was a law enforcement statement and a prior deposition?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Do you have any proposal of what we do?
No, sir.
All right. Garcia?
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
Mr. Garcia is not seeking any action.
Mr. McMahon?
Your Honor, if I could have one brief moment.
Sorry, Your Honor. 2 seconds.
No position.
All right. But nobody's seeking any action on it. I guess it just happened, and we'll move on. I've reminded everybody to tell their witnesses they're under the rule of sequestration, so hopefully everyone has done that. We have other issues we need to take up.
Nothing from the state.
Nothing from Mr. Garcia.
Nothing from Ms. McMahon.
Okay. Let's go back to the discovery issue that I've not ruled upon relating to the traffic ticket of Mr. Garcia, State's Exhibit 122. Anybody have anything new they want to say on that? Or I'm prepared to make a ruling, but if somebody has something further, I'll listen to you.
Nothing further from the state.
Nothing further from Mr. Garcia.
What sanction are you seeking, Mr. Sangane?
Exclusion of the citation, or mention of the citation.
Okay. Mr. DeCosta?
Same, Your Honor.
All right, I'm going to deny the request to exclude State's Exhibit 122. We've had a Richardson inquiry. I'll make my findings. The first finding is whether it was willful or inadvertent. I don't find there was a willful violation. It probably is sloppy work, but I don't find that there was a willful intent to hide evidence as asserted by the defense that is supported. The piece of evidence is listed on the evidence list that the state provided before trial, which it lists Garcia's speeding ticket, or Garcia ticket. Obviously not trying to hide it. It cannot be established at this point in time exactly when the document was actually provided to the defense. I accept the defense assertions that they had not actually seen the document until they received the information provided from Sergeant Corbitt, but the document that would have contained that information was provided to the defense September 16th. The state received it on September 10th, 6 days, maybe a little longer than it should be, but not an unreasonable amount of time. The court invited everybody to look at the evidence back at the beginning of the trial. I accept the prosecutor's assertions that this ticket was included in those matters. I don't find a willful violation. Was it substantial or trivial? I don't think there has to be some spectrum in between substantial or trivial. I don't find it substantial. I don't find it trivial. It's somewhere in between. It is an item of evidence that I'm sure the state would make some argument from, so I certainly can't say it's trivial. At the same time, whether somebody got a speeding ticket, I can't say it's substantial. And the final issue is whether it had a prejudicial effect on the party's trial preparation. I don't find that to be the case. I accept defense counsel's assertions that they've thoroughly investigated this case. I understand that and appreciate that. But as with the other ticket, ultimately what you have is a speeding ticket. I think it's a speeding ticket, traffic ticket of some sort. It's highly unlikely that 5 years after the fact, anything in the way of collateral evidence is going to be gathered as to a traffic ticket, whether the officer would remember this particular ticket beyond what's written in the ticket is highly unlikely there's any other collateral information available. So ultimately what you have is a piece of paper that shows that on a relevant date, Mr. Garcia got a traffic ticket driving a vehicle that is of relevance. The document speaks for itself, and I don't think it would have been any different had it been disclosed 2 months ago versus the way in which it was disclosed. I do, to be clear, say there was a discovery violation, but those are my findings, particularly as to Mr. Garcia. He's probably the one with the most knowledge of this item. He's the one that received the ticket. So he probably has more recollection than anyone else about the circumstances of that. Certainly as to Mr. Garcia, there's even lessened prejudice. Does that leave anything outstanding?
No, sir.
All right. We'll start with the jury at 9 o'clock. Proceed, Mr. DeCosta.
Thank you. Good morning, Sergeant.
Good morning.
Welcome back. I've got 5 more minutes worth of questions for you. You remember yesterday afternoon, we had the easels and we were using them as towers.
That's correct, yes.
We talked about if a tower goes down, but we didn't talk about traffic on a tower.
Correct?
All right, so we had Tower A and we had Tower B. And how it, excuse me, how if Tower A were to go down, that doesn't mean that there wouldn't be cell phone reception, that the range of Tower B could pick up somebody who's in the vicinity of Tower A, right?
Yes.
Now, more specifically on that, it doesn't have to be that the whole tower goes down. One of the tower's sectors could go down, right?
That is possible.
So most of the towers that we're dealing with on this case, they have 3 sectors, right? Most of the Miami towers.
Most of them do, yes.
So if one of those 3 sectors goes down, a caller could be either routed or kicked is the word, right?
Whatever. However, yes.
What's your word?
I guess kicked would be fine.
All right, so it gets kicked to another sector.
Okay.
So they could actually be on the south side of the tower, but they're showing up using the north side sector.
No, I don't. In that situation, the sectors are directional, as we talked about. They're oriented in a very specific direction. And if you're very, very close to the tower, then there's a chance that you could communicate with a sector that's facing the opposite direction. As you move away from the tower, that energy is radiating out in the opposite direction that you are. So your handset's not going to reach around and talk to it. But what you have is within a mile or a mile and a half, there's probably four, in that, the density of cell sites in South Florida is very high. There's going to be another cell site over here or back there that is going to have a sector oriented where you are, and that is the sector your handset would communicate with.
Now, when you're talking about back there, obviously we've scaled things down in here. Tower A was a few feet away from Tower B, but when you're saying over there, if we scale that up, that's miles away, right?
Well, again, as I said, generally our cell site density is about 1.5 miles, maybe a little more in some places. So you're probably not going to go more than 1.5 miles without encountering another cell site.
But we're talking in terms of miles.
We are, yes.
Let's talk about traffic now. So each individual sector has a maximum amount of traffic that it can handle, right?
That's correct.
So, give you a hypothetical. Tower A goes down, right? So then all that traffic that would normally be on Tower A gets pushed onto one of the sectors of Tower B, right?
Possible, yes.
If all of that traffic from Tower A on top of the normal traffic that would be on one of those sectors on Tower B, it could overload that sector, right? Let me rephrase that because that makes it seem like it will go down. It could be more traffic than that sector could handle, right?
It could be, yes.
Which would then cause callers to kick to a third tower, Tower C, right?
It is possible, yes.
And again, we don't have any document showing the traffic limits of any of the towers in Miami, right?
No.
And we don't have any of the record showing what, if any, sectors or towers were down on the handful of dates that we have for the handful of towers, right?
That's correct.
I'm going to bring you back over to your slideshow. Can you see that okay?
I can, yes.
If you could explain to the jury again what this slide represents.
We were looking at a series of events, phone calls or text messages, between the involved parties on the morning of July 19th.
Is there a reason we have a smaller slide today?
Yeah, if you want to transfer
Okay,
off of,
okay,
yeah, he's
All right.
on.
What we can do is that. It's off of my computer for the
okay,
not having to deal with the page problem that we had
okay,
yesterday.
okay, I'm sorry. Just
Okay.
like the bigger one, with getting old, it makes it easier for me to see.
Does that work out?
But
All right. So, Sergeant, what you're talking about now, we're going to switch over. And I'm showing you now Defense 10. What you're talking about is these calls right here, right?
This particular slide is dealing with like 10:04 through 10:23 a.m.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, what we're looking at here are the call detail records for Captain McVanoff on the morning of July 19th.
That's correct.
The first communication is right there. That's Louis Rivera calling Captain McVanoff, right?
That's correct.
And these calls go in between the time frame of 10:20 and 10:31, right?
Yes.
Now going back over to your slide, what you have here are the movements of Louis Rivera plotted in blue, right?
The cell sites he's communicating with are plotted in blue, yes.
So can you say what path of travel he was taking? He's over in Miami at 10:07, but somehow 3 minutes later he's down in between Miami Beach and Miami. That's just a situation that he's hitting different towers, right?
That's correct. The cell sites he's communicating with does not mean he is standing at the base of that tower, obviously. The tower has a coverage area, and he is somewhere within the coverage area of that cell site. As I mentioned before, crossing the water, there's no obstructions, and that signal is more likely to travel further than it would if he were in town. So that could be consistent with him crossing a bridge or crossing that waterway, and his handset will be able to see a cell site that was located further south.
It could also be consistent with him once the calls start traveling over here to Miami Beach, right?
Yes.
This is your next slide, right?
Yes,
Now again, that's not Rivera's residence, that's a residence of Jessica Rodriguez, right?
that's correct.
Rivera's residence is over on Miami Beach.
His listed address, yes.
Now, what you have here, you have all of the data that you had for Catherine McBanwell. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, the pings that you had for her were between the time frames of 10:06 and 10:23.
On the previous slide, yes.
All right. And during that time, between the time frame of 10:20 and 10:31, there's phone calls that are being placed, right?
From who? I'm sorry.
Let's go back over to defense 10. There's phone calls being placed up until 10:31, right?
That's correct.
Now, one would assume you're not going to call somebody that you're standing next to, right?
Correct.
Now, just to make sure this is clear, you've put in all the data for about a half hour's worth of time on one map, right?
Yes.
So what we're seeing here is that Luis Rivera is in the vicinity of Jessica Rodriguez's house, but correct me if I'm wrong, he's hitting the south side of this tower, maybe the south or the west side, and the west side of that tower.
No, sir. I'm sorry. Are you saying the sectors he's communicating with are inconsistent with his house?
No, I'm just asking which sector he's on.
He is on a sector for the 1037 event. He's on a sector that's oriented at about, let me see. I'll have to pull up a different map to tell you the exact sectors. Again, here I'm just representing the actual cell sites that he's communicating with and their proximity to the residence he was staying at.
Now I'm going to go back to the other screen. Basically, we can say that he's in and around Miami Beach and Miami on the morning of July 19th, right?
Yes.
You can't put his exact location anywhere.
No.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. The time frame that, or no, enlarge it for you a little bit. Tell me if it's too small. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. The last, the word is ping, right?
Communication?
The last communication that Catherine McBanwell's handset has with one of the towers is at 10:31, which is well before Luis Rivera is even in the area, or his handset is even in the area.
Well, he has events at 10:23, which would be more consistent with the island than being near his residence. His next event, I believe we have there, would be 10:35. So somewhere in that time frame, he begins to communicate with cell sites closer to where he was staying.
Now, because there was no use of Catherine McBanwell's handset, you can't say that she's still even within that area.
That's correct.
Just because there isn't any stuff on her phone going on for the next, 60 minutes?
I believe it's 40-some minutes. It's 11:23 is the next event.
And that's something that's standard with cell phones, they're not being used.
That's correct.
Right now, I'm cross-examining you, and my phone isn't being used, right?
That's correct.
All right, now, the area that you have, do you know what roadway that is?
It's the major highway there.
95 North, right?
No, that's not 95.
Which one is that?
I believe that's US 1.
That turns into 95?
I'm
You
not
tell
familiar.
me, I don't know.
I'm not familiar. That's, I believe, what they call Biscayne Boulevard, maybe?
You'd agree with me that that's a major thoroughway in Miami?
It appears to be, yes.
All right. Now, it appears to be because it's on maps, the wider roads are usually indicative of multi-lanes,
That's correct, yes.
like highways.
Correct.
Now, in a major city like Miami, would highways have traffic?
Yes.
So what we have here in a nutshell is, and correct me if I'm wrong, I just want to make sure that we have it clear. We can say that on the morning of July 19th, Luis Rivera was in and around Miami and Miami Beach,
Yes.
and Catherine McBanwell was in and around Miami.
Yes.
Could be consistent with something going on at Jessica Rodriguez's house.
Could be.
Could be consistent with Catherine McBanwell driving north, driving south, driving around, doing errands, right?
Could be.
Last topic. I promised 5 minutes, so I'll speed it up. You were asked questions about Celebrite extractions.
Yes.
You received from Apple Charles Adelson's iCloud information.
The Tallahassee Police Department did, yes.
You get that raw data, you run it through the Celebrite Reader program, right?
Yes,
And it allows you to be able to take a look at the information that's contained in that.
it does.
Correct me if I'm wrong, you have over 300,000 iMessages for Charles Adelson.
That sounds correct.
And this covers as early as 2012 all the way up to 2016.
Correct.
Sergeant, I'm handing you what's been pre-marked. It's Defense 12. You know what that is, don't you?
Yes, sir.
Those are screenshots of the Celebrite Reader with specific iMessages for Charles Adelson's iCloud data.
That's correct, yes.
Now you know that because you know the Celebrite Reader and you reviewed his data.
I reviewed most of his data, yes.
Defense 12 is a fair and accurate depiction of what one would see in the Celebrite Reader program, right?
It is, yes.
You were asked a question by Ms. Norris yesterday. In your review, there was any evidence whatsoever of communications in between Sigfredo Garcia and Charles Adelson.
That's correct.
At the beginning of the cross-examination, in your first cross, that ties into this, we talked about how there can be other types of electronic communications that you may not see, right?
That's correct.
One could make a phone call through WhatsApp,
They could.
make a phone call through Facebook,
They could.
message through WhatsApp.
They could.
They could call from a phone that isn't on your radar during the investigation.
That's correct.
Now, if you could explain to the jury, Defense 12, we have a highlighted line,
Has this been offered in evidence?
moving to evidence was the pre-marked as Defense 12.
Any further objections?
No, Your Honor, no.
Any further?
No objection.
All right, they'll be admitted.
Sergeant, if you can explain what we're seeing.
This is one way to look at some of the data. Not as efficient, but we have basically the timeline, and so the Celebrite will collect all of the events in the phone and assemble them into a timeline. So if a picture is taken at 9 o'clock and there's a phone call at 9:02 and a text message at 9:05, we can see those things as they occur chronologically.
You need to move your frequent.
Sergeant, were you done?
Well, as opposed to just looking at all the pictures or looking at all the text messages or all the phone calls individually, we can see these in this timeline view. So you have an indication of the from phone number, which would be Ms. Magbanowa's number.
Well, I'm going to ask you another question first,
Okay.
just before we go into that. Timeline, this over here, the 306,000, is that the amount of events that are in this Celebrite?
Those are events in the timeline. So those could be calendar entries, again, call logs, text messages, pictures, all those things that populate in the timeline. So that's how many events of pretty much all categories.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, this is a text message from Catherine McVano's phone number to Charles Adelson's phone number.
It is, yes.
And the message is right here under body, right?
Correct.
Who is Tuto?
Tuto is the nickname for Mr. Garcia.
And what is the message?
Did Tuto call your phone?
And that's right here, right?
Correct.
Now, this is an almost immediate response from Charles Adelson to Catherine McVanoa. And what's the message back?
No.
Moments later, there's another message. And what is the message that Charles Adelson writes to Catherine McVanoa?
Actually, he did.
A few seconds later, another message. And what's that message?
It's a little hard for me to read. Something to the effect of,
I don't want to burn your eyes out.
thank you. He invited me to go deep sea fishing. He was so nice.
Now, you know, and I hate to sound so crude, you know the cell phone stuff, right?
I do, yes.
You're in no position to determine what is sarcasm, what is the context of a text message between other people, are you?
Well, in all of the probably now hundreds of thousands to millions of communications, actual communications that I've looked at, I can tell you that I've done it a lot, if that helps draw context.
Or you're in no different position than anybody else that sends and receives text messages, right?
Correct.
The next message that we have, correct me if I'm wrong, this is from Catherine McDaniel back to Charles Adelson. I'm serious. Now, in your experience in looking at millions of messages, would that not indicate that she is not joking around?
That would indicate that she thinks his response was joking. Is in, no, I'm serious. Did he call you?
And what's her full message?
He's fucking driving me crazy.
Next message.
Is your cell phone listed online?
Now that's from Catherine McDaniel to Charles Adelson.
That's correct.
Last message.
I don't think my cell is listed online.
What are the relevant dates of your investigation? It was June for the first trip and July for the second trip when the murder happened, right?
That's correct.
Now this would be a handful of weeks before all of that happened, correct?
That's correct.
April 25th of 2014.
Yes.
As an expert, can you rule out the possibility that Sigfredo Garcia and Charles Adelson were communicating through other phones, through other apps, or through other electronic communications? Can you rule that out?
Overruled.
I cannot.
One brief moment, Your Honor. Sorry, Your Honor, I gotta go back to the...
We're gonna have to get you a new watch, Mr. Because that's 5 minutes.
I'll make it up on another examination later. I'll save some time. Sorry. Sergeant, real brief. What do those X's mean?
X's mean that they've been deleted.
All the messages were deleted.
Well, the ones that you have there are yes.
Between... Now, again, this would be deleted on Charles Adelson's side, right?
That's correct.
Final questions. You had evidence that Sigfredo Garcia got rid of his phone
Yes,
after the homicide?
that's correct.
Luis Rivera is...
Objection, Judge, the classification, got rid of this phone.
Restate your question, please, Mr. Acosta.
You testified that you learned that Sigfredo Garcia stopped using his phone after the homicide?
That's correct.
Same with Luis Rivera eventually?
That's correct.
Not Catherine McBanwell?
That's correct.
Thank you, Your Honor. Nothing further.
Redirect.
Yes, sir.
Are you prepared for this? To dovetail into the last question you were asked, were most of the messages that Charlie Adelson had with Catherine McBanwell deleted in his phone?
Yes.
Not just that one particular conversation that defense counsel showed.
Correct.
I want to go back to yesterday, briefly when we were discussing like the comfort rental car. This is the June trip, the vehicle that Sigfredo Garcia rented from Comfort. Can you pull up, we'll strike that. Your Honor, at this time I'd offer into evidence States Exhibit 122, the UTC with the certified court record documentation.
Any additional objection?
I'll stand on my previous objection.
Same, Your Honor.
All right, my ruling will be the same. I'll admit 122. I will allow recross on this issue.
Yes, sir. Did law enforcement have reason to believe or have reason or an explanation for why it was Sigfredo Garcia rented the Nissan on June 2nd and then exchanged that vehicle for a Hyundai Sonata on June 3rd?
Objection, Judge, facts not in evidence, and speculation.
Sustained.
Can you show us the traffic citation, please? State's Exhibit 122 that was just admitted, published that. Okay. And does this slide show the detail for State's Exhibit 122, the traffic citation?
It does.
To whom was that issued?
To Sigfredo Garcia
On what date?
on June 2nd of 2014,
At what time?
9:48 p.m.
And do you recall what time the Nissan was rented from Comfort, approximately?
I believe 8:50 was the time frame, if I recall.
Okay, now can you go back to the traffic citation? And is the vehicle indicated on the UTC the same make and model and color of vehicle and tag of vehicle that Mr. Garcia rented from Comfort Rental?
It is, yes.
Okay. And was it subsequent to this traffic citation that the vehicle was exchanged at Comfort for the Hyundai Sonata?
It was, yes.
All of the records you have been talking about, both the first time you testified and yesterday and today, are those real-time location information or are they historical call detail records?
They are historical call detail records.
With historical call detail records, do we get the content of voice communications, meaning if I were to call you and we talk for 5 minutes, do those records give us the content of what we're talking about over the telephone?
It does not.
You were asked yesterday by Mr. Zanganet about your knowledge of a federal wiretap on Mr. Rivera in 2014.
Yes.
Related to gang activity. Did the FBI provide you with names associated with different gang members and the phone numbers associated with those individuals?
They provided a number of names and phone numbers, which to my understanding, at least some of those did come from that wiretap.
Were you able to cross-reference those with the numbers, were you able to cross-reference those names and phone numbers with phone records of persons of interest in this particular murder investigation?
Yes, they were added in, again, to our analytical software. Those names were added in. So any reports or call logs or things that were generated would show the phone number and the name. So those were provided to the investigators. Makes it easier for them when evaluating days or looking at communications to see a name with a number.
And once that was done, was there any phone evidence in this case to suggest that this murder involved a Latin King gang activity?
None that I'm aware of.
Regarding the lack of cell phone evidence that Sigfredo Garcia went on this June trip in 2014 with Luis Rivera, is there any phone evidence which proves that Sigfredo Garcia was not on the June trip in 2014?
Objection, outside the scope of the right.
Overruled.
Or scope of cross, Judge, I apologize.
I understood your objection.
Look, do you need me to ask the question again? Or?
No, I understand. Again, without having any location information, there's certainly no way to say that he wasn't on the trip.
In your demonstrative visual aid where you've indicated Luis Rivera's residence on these demonstrative maps, what exact address did you use?
It was, I'm sorry, I don't know off the top of my head, 135th Street. I could actually get the actual numerics if you need.
If you could, I'd love
Yes, I was given 1505 Northeast 135th Street in North Miami.
Did that one more time, I'm sorry.
1505 Northeast 135th Street, North Miami.
Is there any evidence that you are aware of that Luis Rivera was staying at this Normandy address you've been asked about repeatedly?
Again, none that I'm aware of.
Did you have phone records to review to see where it appeared Luis Rivera was putting his head every night?
Yes.
And were those consistent with Jessica Rodriguez's house throughout this time period we're focusing on?
Yes.
If you could pull up for me This would be the June 2nd, 2014 map demonstrative, and it shows, this is the one showing Catherine Magdaleno's handset moving from her residence to the area of the Comfort rental car. Are there a lot of towers in this area we're being shown?
Yes, actually, the small red dots represent the other Sprint cell sites in the area. The large red dot, obviously, is the one that her handset is communicating with.
Can you zoom in on the Comfort rental car? And the red dot for the 853 through 858, is that just a larger red dot indicating the exact tower that she's communicating with?
That's correct, yes.
And zoom in a little more for me, please. And that fat red arrow is this, I guess, if you were to think of it as a pie with the sectors, that fat red arrow is indicating she's somewhere this direction that arrow is pointing?
Yes, so the particular side of the cell site she's communicating with is this one. It's oriented in this direction. And again, we talked about, we expect as a handset travels around a cell site that this sector is going to cover until this one picks up and that one, and I apologize, they're small in this particular slide. So that does put her, the coverage area of that cell site somewhere in this direction.
Can you zoom back out again for me? One more time. One more time. Can you also pull up, oh wait, can you also pull up, this is the July 17th location near Truscott Drive. Can you zoom out on that for me as well? One more time. Okay. What are all these little blue things on this map?
Those would be the other AT&T cell sites. Mr. Rivera's phone was an AT&T phone, so these are the AT&T cell sites.
So these are all the cell sites in the area shown of Tallahassee that a phone on that, with that cell carrier could be communicating with at that particular time?
That's correct.
And zoom back in on the one with the fat arrow on it. So
There's two, sorry.
it's okay. Okay. So of all of those towers that we just saw for this particular event on July 17th for Luis Rivera's phone, of all of those towers, these are the two that it's communicating with.
That's correct.
And do the two large arrows indicate that, would it be reasonable to expect the handset to be somewhere in the area that those big fat arrows are pointing?
Yes, when we have an event that maybe toggles between two cell sites, it communicates with one, maybe possibly begins an event on one, ends on another, and when those sectors are oriented towards one another, it's reasonable to conclude that they're not beyond this cell site or beyond this cell site, they're actually somewhere in between those two cell sites.
And the pictures that we've seen here of the maps showing numerous cell locations, and sometimes the language was used miles and miles and miles apart. There may be a mile and a half apart at most.
Well, that density changes a lot. And here within the city, they're very close together. As you get out into the rural parts of the county, they're much further apart, as you can see here. So, and that is true in South Florida as well. They're a little closer together because the population density is higher. But it's a difficult question to answer because it varies by where you're at.
So if we're looking here in Tallahassee, we're a smaller town, you'd agree, than Miami. Miami would have even closer, more towers that would be even closer to one another.
That's correct.
Mr. DeCoste asked you some questions about this kind of parade of horribles of one tower could be out of service and be down, and then maybe the next tower
Objection, move to strike, counsel testifying parade of horribles.
Rephrase,
I can
please.
rephrase.
Norris.
You were asked about a series of events that could possibly happen. For example, one tower could be down, and then the neighboring tower could also be down, and so forth. And then, in addition, one tower might have too much traffic, along with the towers being out of service, et cetera. Is there any indication that the locations and cell sites and sectors that you have told this jury about on each of these slides, is there any indication that any of those factors were at play in those situations?
Again, there's no indication. What we're looking at is the cell site and the sector that the handset communicated with. So we know that one is functioning because the handset actually used it. As we continue to look at events over a period of time, and while it's not conclusive, we do see that her handset communicates with, over the course of the investigation, every one of those cell sites that we saw at some point or another her handset communicates with, which again would be another at least indicator that those cell sites are there and functional.
Because if you have a record showing it's communicating with the cell.
Objection leading.
Sustained.
Would you have records of a handset communicating with a tower if that tower were down?
We would not.
Objection speculation.
Overruled.
Would you have a record of a handset communicating with a tower if that tower were down under the hypotheticals you got?
No, if the handset communicates with a tower in a sector, we know that that's functional. At least that sector is functional for that event.
And are you taking into account multiple different factors when determining what tower a handset is communicating with?
Well, really, that determination is very simple. That's in the records, and that is taken directly from the records provided to us by the carrier, and I simply take that information and place it on the map and show the orientation of that particular sector. And then it's a simple matter of comparing other locations that may or may not be covered by that cell site.
In your experience, how common is it for a cell site or a tower to be down or inoperable?
In my experience, it's uncommon.
Do most of these towers or cell sites have any capabilities to back themselves up should they have an outage or go down?
Well, there's certainly backup power considerations that if we lose power for some reason in a natural disaster, there may be generator backup for them. And again, the way the network is laid out, that there is sufficient coverage should a cell site not be functional for whatever reason, that there is other cell sites your handset could communicate with.
If you have told us that throughout your presentation, if you have told us that a particular location is within a coverage area of a cell site, how confident are you that that location is within the coverage area of the cell site that you specified?
Objection. Improper question. Bolstering.
It's also fairly convoluted. I sustain the objection. I'm not real sure what the question asked for.
I'll rephrase. For the locations you've indicated to this jury about what cell site is being communicated with, are you confident in those locations?
Objection. Improper bolstering.
Sustained.
How do you know that the sectors you've indicated are accurate?
Well, again, they're taken from the carrier records.
The evening of July 14th, and to remind you from yesterday, this was the dinner with Charlie Adelson with Catherine McBanoa. There was some suggestion about Luis Rivera's driver's license location, Normandy Avenue, being near where Charlie Adelson's phone was. Do you recall that?
That's correct.
Based on all of the evidence that you have in this case, is it more consistent with being at Catherine McBanoa's residence than the Normandy address?
Objection. Improper question. Speculation.
Overruled.
And it goes to the ultimate issue of the case.
Overruled.
As those locations are so close together, I would not be able to rule out one over the other.
Is there any indication that Luis Rivera's handset is at that Normandy address at that location and time?
I do not recall. He was actually in that area at some point in the evening, yes.
Okay, prior to the later event?
I don't recall the exact time, but he, again, was in that area, yes.
That evening of July 14th was, how many weeks was that after?
You're looking down and talking to Ms. Norris.
Sorry, Judge.
I can't understand you.
That July 14th evening, how many weeks was that after the June trip?
Oh, geez. 6 or 7 weeks. The June trip was June 4th, 5th, so this is 14 days into July now.
Mary Teresa, a bit of time. One thing I want to make sure of on Defense Exhibits 8, sorry, I have them out of order, 7, 8, 9, and 10, all of the times on these are correct, right?
Well,
Show them what you're talking about, please.
so the original question asked of me was, when first evaluating these, do they accurately represent the records? And they do, absolutely. As far as the times, they are correct in the records, but we understand that sometimes the times may not be correct to our location. So for Sprint records, we know that their text messages are delivered to us in Central Time. So we make an adjustment as we look at the records to make sure that we're looking at them from our perspective. The AT&T records are provided in Coordinated Universal Time, so we have to do an adjustment for that. The records are correct, the times are accurate, we just need to know the time zone for them.
Well, what time zone are these records in the Defense Exhibits?
These are the records from Ms. Bagbanowa and Sprint. So again, the voice phone calls are in the time that her handset was, which would have been Eastern Time, and the text messages are in Central Time.
So any text messages would need to be adjusted in what way?
They would need to have an hour added to them.
I want to show you what's in evidence as Defense Exhibit 7. The first page. You see, for example, these two purple, I know you can't read the numbers, but the two purple events here on June 4th. One is at 17:21:12, the other is at 17:21:13. And for called number, there are some codes here, like 812. What does that mean?
Well, as we see the notation there of routed calls, most of the incoming calls that we see to Ms. Bagbanowa's handset are routed somewhere within the network somehow. So we're just seeing an indication again of routing, and there are a few reasons for that. The call did complete in that particular case. There's no indication that it went to voicemail, but there is some inter-network routing of that call.
So is that two separate calls?
No, it is one call.
So although it appears, okay. I want to ask you the same question about page 2 of Defense Exhibit 7. For example, up here, there are two purple lines to this number ending in 6403. And it appears that, for example, this one was at 22:18:47, and then another one at 22:18:47. Are those different events?
No, those again, same event, and in this case, there is indication that it was routed to voicemail for this particular call.
And the last one I want to point out are these blue numbers down here that are highlighted, where we have, for example, 3 of those on June 5th had the exact same time, 13, 16, and 7. Are those 3 separate events?
They're most likely not. In this case, they're not 3 separate events. They are, again, one event showing some routing and a redirection to voicemail. In any of the summaries that I put together for this, the best way to know, we're looking at the incoming events here in her phone, and we're seeing some routing, and it could be 1 call, it could be 2 calls. The easiest thing for me to do is go back to the other person's phone records and see how many outgoing events there are. So in any of those demonstratives, I made sure to look at if we had them, the other person's phone records to see how many times they actually dialed her number, and that helped me reduce any of those extra events in the records.
So would you agree with me that the raw records that you were asked to review and that were introduced into evidence yesterday, Defense Exhibit 7, 8, 9, and 10, may make it appear to a layperson's eyes that these are multiple events, but to someone with your training and experience, you know that they're only single events?
That's correct, yes.
Turning now to Defense Exhibit, I think this is actually the same exhibit, Exhibit 7. Do you recall being asked a series of questions about, you put up the map of the June trip up from Miami to Tallahassee. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And you were asked how many phone calls there were between Catherine McBanois and, I believe it was Sigfredo Garcia?
I believe so, yes.
And defense counsel had narrowed that time frame for which they wanted to know how many calls there were between Catherine McBanois and Sigfredo Garcia to just the travel.
That's correct.
I believe you indicated it started around 1:40 a.m. and they arrived in Tallahassee approximately 12:38 p.m. Is that right?
Yes.
Did it appear the majority of that travel was during the middle of the night?
It did, yes.
If you were not limited to that, we'll strike that. You did have one call in that time period, didn't you?
We did, yes.
And what time was that call?
I believe that was, and I apologize for not having the exact times up, but I think we had a 9:55 call.
Was that this call highlighted in green?
Yes.
And that was an outgoing call from Catherine McBanois' handset to Sigfredo Garcia
That's correct.
in the morning hours.
That's correct.
Next time, Your Honor, I'd like to publish what's in evidence in State's Exhibit 181.
Ma'am?
If you expand the June trip and don't just look at the drive during the middle of the night, but look at the entire June trip as a whole, is there substantial communication between Catherine McBanois and Sigfredo Garcia?
There are.
On the 5th of June 2014, how many communications are there between these two handsets?
I'm sorry, counting from across the room, I'd say about 13 or 14.
Would you describe that as constant communication?
I would say at least regular communication. It does appear to be 14.
14.
Yes.
And then on the 6th, we have approximately 5 additional ones for this particular time frame.
That's correct.
Now I want to show you what's in evidence of Defense Exhibit 9. Second page. Mr. DeCoste asked you if there was any call between Sigfredo Garcia and Catherine McBanois' handsets prior to 12 p.m. on July 17th, 2014. Do you recall that?
I believe so, yes.
Is there any call between Sigfredo Garcia and Catherine McBanois' handset on the 17th?
Yes, there are calls between their handsets on the 17th.
And are those indicated here by the green highlights?
That's correct, yes.
And who is calling who in that record?
For all of those events, we show, again, this is Ms. Bagbanowa's records, so outbound from her records means that she is doing the calling, and so those are outbound calls from her to Mr. Garcia's number.
And what are the times of those two calls to Sigfredo Garcia?
The first two are at 1:51 and 1:52.
PM?
PM, yes, sorry.
Now, Your Honor, if I may publish State's Exhibit 182, which is in evidence. Does this exhibit show the communications between Catherine Magbanowa and Sigfredo Garcia on the July trip?
It does, yes.
And do we see those two calls from Magbanowa's handset to Garcia's handset at 1:51 and 1:52 on the day before the murder?
That's correct, yes.
How many other communications are there between Ms. Magbanowa and Mr. Garcia's handsets on the 17th?
On the 17th,
Yes, sir.
again, I'm sorry, trying to read across the room. I want to say 10.
In addition to the 1:51 and 1:52 calls?
Well, no, that would include those. I think I see 11 not including them, so we'll say 9 additional.
Sorry, my computer went to sleep. Sorry, 1 second. Now I want to look at Defense Exhibit 10. And these are calls from Saturday morning, July 19th?
That's correct, yes.
Do these records indicate that Mr. Rivera called Catherine Magbanowa, not the other way around?
That's correct, yes.
But they clearly communicated. Would you agree with that?
They did, yes.
Prior to that phone call, Mr. Rivera and Ms. Magbanowa's handsets had never communicated?
That's correct.
Objection. Improper question. The records are limited.
Overruled.
I also want to show you now State's Exhibit 97. I'm sorry, it can't all fit on there. Are these the communications between the relevant parties Saturday morning, July 19th?
Objection as to relevant parties.
Overruled.
For this particular summary, it's actually all the communications for that morning.
If you were asked some questions yesterday about Luis Rivera's testimony, do you recall that?
I do, yes.
Would these records be indicative of Catherine Magbanowa's handset attempting desperately to get in contact with Mr. Garcia's handset?
Yes, it would.
And at the time of these beginning calls, 9:44 through approximately just before 10 o'clock, that's when she's traveling south from the direction of Charles Adelson's house?
Objection. Speculation.
Sustained.
During that time period, that was the slide you showed us of her communication records showing her traveling south.
That's correct.
And the direction she was traveling south was Charles Adelson's residence located north of that.
It was, yes.
after the beginning communications are Luis Rivera, Sigfredo, start that, not Sigfredo Garcia, that aren't Luis Rivera and Catherine Ivanola's handsets consistent with being near the area of Luis Rivera's house?
After that time frame, the 1031 event, yes.
And that's the same night that Mr. Rivera and Mr. Garcia's handsets returned from Tallahassee to Miami?
Well, this would be the morning after that. Yes.
Once you have them all in the same area, Mr. Rivera and Ms. Magbanua, and we don't know where Mr. Garcia's handset is, that 50-minute period or 40-some-odd minute period you were asked about, during that time, is there any communications between Garcia, Magbanua, and Rivera?
No.
Can you pull up Saturday, July 19th, the slide? It is showing Ms. Magbanua's, or Ms. Ritchie. I want you to show the location information for that 9:44 a.m. beginning series of calls. Can I have you plug in an address for me?
I can try,
Can you
yes.
do that?
Not in the way I am right now, but we can probably get to that. If you want to mute me for just 1 second. Sorry. And I'm sorry, what would be the address?
I want you to look up 10735 Northeast 9th Avenue.
Is that Biscayne Park?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay. Where is that address in relation to Catherine Magbanua's events beginning at 9:44 a.m. on July 19th?
Well,
Are you ready for me?
yes, yes. And I apologize, from this particular map, I can't make a note on there right now, but this is the Northeast 9th Avenue, that the address that I was asked about. That particular numeric would appear to be near this intersection here. So as we come out a little bit, I'll leave my arrow on where that address is. We can see it's not that terribly far from where her handset's communicating for those events.
Okay. Can you zoom out again? To show me the 9:44 a.m. events? Okay. So I wish I had a laser pointer, but I don't.
Judge has one.
I do.
May I use that, Your Honor?
Sorry.
So and correct me if I'm wrong, but you indicated that location was somewhere around here?
It still should be where the mouse pointer is.
Oh, where is it? Okay, sorry. So right there is that address I just gave you of 10735 Northeast 9th Avenue.
That's correct.
You were asked yesterday about, hypothetically, if Ms. Magbanua could be coming from Yendra Mascaro's house. Is that
That's correct.
you didn't know what her address is, did you?
I didn't tie the name to the address. As I looked at it on the map, I realized I was familiar with it.
Okay, so you are familiar with Ms. Yendra Mascaro's address?
Yes,
Okay, and it's that where your little pointer is right there.
correct.
So is Catherine Magbanua's handset's path of travel consistent with her leaving Yendra Mascaro's house?
It would not be.
yesterday you were asking questions, for example, by defense counsel about the comfort rental car location. Back in June, when Magbanwa's handset travels from her residence to the comfort rental location back to her residence. You were asked whether that could be indicative of her dropping someone off at the airport. Do you recall that?
I do.
Do you also recall being asked some questions about the July 19th time period from 10 to 10:30 a.m.? And Mr. DeCoste pointed out some houses and said she could have been at this house, she could have been at this house, etc.
Correct.
Is it also, going back to the comfort rental location, consistent with Ms. Magbanwa's handset going to Comfort to rent a car and then returning to her residence?
It is also consistent with that, yes.
Same thing for the many different houses. Is it consistent, could she have been at any of these other houses? Is it also possible it could be consistent with her being at Mr. Rivera's residence for a money drop on Saturday morning?
That's correct.
Another question you were asked dealt with each particular set of data that we went through from June through July. And you were asked, you have no information that ties her to a murder. Do you recall that question?
Yes.
When you're doing your cell phone analysis in a case like this, are you looking at each particular event in isolation?
No, certainly not.
Are you looking at all of the events combined to determine, what type of activity is going on?
Yes, we try to look at as much as we have to either add context or meaning or to give us some indication of what may be occurring. And obviously in this case it was a voluminous amount of information, but we tried to look at as much as we could.
For Saturday, July 19th, that morning, are there any phone records for Luis Rivera that could be consistent with the barber shop that's right next to his house that he goes to?
Yes.
I think the last slide I want to ask you about is, let me get to it, sorry. This is the one from July 19th showing Luis Rivera's handset. Yes, sir, that one, thank you. Here we have several locations. Magbanwa's residence and the yellow flag, then Ms. Carmona Garcia residence with another yellow flag, and then Mr. Rivera's residence. Do the phone records support, or would the phone records be consistent with Rivera's handset traveling from the area of his residence, including that potential barber shop, to Stephanie Carmona's house, and then returning to the Rivera residence?
They would be consistent with that, yes.
And is it true that once Rivera's handset returns to the area of his residence, there's no further attempts to reach Sigfredo Garcia by any of these people?
That's correct.
Objection, Your Honor.
Your legal objection?
Improper characterization, people versus
Overruled.
handsets.
You were asked some questions yesterday about Luis Rivera's old phone number. It was a 305 number. I believe it was 305-935-6615.
That sounds correct, yes.
Okay. Did Catherine Magbanwa's handset ever call a number extremely similar to that number?
Objection, relevance.
I'll approve this,
How close?
Okay, let me tell you. Did she ever call the number 305-934-6615?
No, she did not.
Did she ever call 305-935-6615?
You'll have to give me a second to look for that one.
Yes, sir.
Objection, sidebar, Your Honor.
Okay. Gary's probably about ready for a break anyway. Why don't we take 15 minutes? Scott?
Yes, sure. Can I use the overhead to make the objection?
You bet.
Make it simple. Louis Rivera testified that his phone number was 305.
Everybody either sit, have a seat, or step out. We've got some business to conduct.
Louis Rivera testified that his phone number was 305-934-6615. What shows up in the phone records is a phone number that is different than the phone number that actually belonged in. The phone number that shows up in the records, and the sergeant here can tell us, is 934-6615.
Do that again.
The phone number that Louis Rivera testified about, that was his, is 305-934-6615. And that's the number that shows up in Captain McDaniel's call records. What we have is we have a subpoena from Sherry Bennett to Apple. There was a response from Apple with this business record certification, and we received this stack of documents from the state in discovery. What Your Honor will see is that it's for Louis Rivera, the email tato1983@ymail, and the phone number is 305-935-6615. Different phone number. Agent Patrick Sanford also did a report of his review, 935-6615. The phone number communicated by Captain McBanwell was 934-6615, and I believe the sergeant will tell us that that's what's in her records as well, too. That's what Louis Rivera testified about. So that's why I objected to relevance, because it looks like to the jury that she's talking to Louis Rivera, but it's a different phone number. That's all I got. Thank you.
Mr. Norris.
Yes, sir.
And frankly, I don't remember exactly what Mr. Rivera testified to, but anyway, have a seat, Mr. DeCosta.
Yes.
Yes, sir, and I don't recall the exact number. I believe Ms. Kappelman, if I'm not mistaken, said, I'm going to read a number to you and tell me if that sounds familiar, and he indicated, yes, that sounds like my old number. The state's argument here, and this is in response to the questions of Mr. DeCoste yesterday, is that Sergeant Corbitt can testify that there are only 2 times ever, because Captain McBanwa and Louis Rivera have never communicated, but for that July 19th date, there are only 2 times ever that Captain McBanwa tried to call a number very similar to Mr. Rivera's. That number that she dialed was 305-934-6615. The 2 times that she attempted that number, only 1 digit off from Mr. Rivera's previous phone number, was on June 5th, the day before the first attempted murder, and on June 17th, the day before the actual murder. No other time did she ever attempt to call that particular phone number. I think that is significant because our
June 5th and when?
June 5th, 2014 and July 17, 2014. And I think the coincidence of attempting to call a number only 1 digit off from Mr. Rivera's old number, then her late...
Well, what do you think his old number is?
I don't recall his exact testimony, but I know it was 305-93-something-6615.
I mean, they're saying we have records for a number. Do we have records for a phone number for Rivera?
I can hand them up to Your Honor.
That's not, I think he's asking for you're talking about call detail records for that phone number?
Right.
That would be a question for Sergeant Corbitt, Your Honor, I don't know. I don't believe so.
I don't believe so either.
I beg your pardon?
I don't believe we do, sir. I'm looking right now.
And you're waving something at us, Mr. DeCoste. What are the records you're waving at us?
The same things that I presented, Your Honor, I can show it on the...
But what are they? That's my question.
So, this is the warrant that was sent to Apple by the Tallahassee Police Department. Apple responded first with a business record certification, and also now it was difficult. It prints out different than the spreadsheet, but this is the response from Apple. It's a 16-page document that has the email address for Louis Rivera, the phone number that belonged to him, and then I have a 302 from Patrick Sanford that talks about his review of it, that the phone number belonging to Louis Rivera was the 935 number.
Well, Apple doesn't give phone records, so what records are these that you're saying came from Apple?
Subscriber information.
Apple doesn't run a phone service. So what are the records supposed to be?
So this is going to show that Luis Rivera hadn't walked around through it.
I understand what you're showing me, but it's records of what? It's not a phone record. Apple doesn't keep phone records. What is it a record of?
User information. This is all the data that Apple had to give back to the Tallahassee Police Department pursuant to the warrant that was sent to them.
For the 935 number.
Correct, Your Honor.
Is that what they were seeking?
Well, actually, let me clarify that, Your Honor. In the warrant, it was all information for this email address, not for a specific phone number. So they were trying to find anything that...
Yeah, well, that's why I'm confused. Apple doesn't keep phone records. So you're saying that for that email address, that's the subscriber number that was given.
What I think, so this has Apple iCloud account. I have Apple iCloud. When I want to get into it, I have to use an email address and a password to log in. So I think that's why, and I can't assume what Sherry Bennett is doing, but when they got this document signed by a judge for the search warrant, that they wanted to find out from Apple anything that Apple had associated with the email address that they knew applied to Luis Rivera. Luis Rivera, again, is Tato. His date of birth is 4/25/1983, which is consistent here. So they sent that over to Apple, and Apple sent back everything they had for any logins using that email address as the username.
Right. Ms. Norris?
Your Honor, and my concern about those records, I think, is similar to the court's as far as I think that is user-provided information to Apple as far as phone number, contact information. Mr. Rivera testified to this number. Ms. McVanoa's handset tried to call this number on two very pivotal dates out of all the records, both of which were during both murder trips. And that's the relevance and why I'm seeking to elicit.
And that's the 934 number.
Yes, sir.
Which Mr. DeCoste agrees is the number Mr. Rivera said he was using?
No. Your Honor, so I knew this issue when it came up, and I made specific notes, and I'm sure that if we go back in the record, that what he said was his phone number was not 935, it was 934.
Right. And the states agree with that. They said she tried to call the 934 number.
No. No. Luis Rivera says his phone number was the 934 number.
Right.
The records show the 934 number. The number that belongs, and I think it's improper for us to assume what's entered in user information. The records from Apple show that Luis Rivera's phone number was 935.
That's not his phone records. That's a subscriber information in Apple. But do you have calls to a 934 number?
I have 3 attempted calls.
What's that?
I have 3 attempted calls.
You seem to be supporting the state's argument that this is relevant, Mr. DeCoste. If that was Rivera's testimony, that his number is 305-934-6615, then calls by Ms. McVanoa to that number are relevant.
No, Your Honor.
Well,
That's not
what you said.
That's not his number, though.
Well, that's what you contend. You're not a witness.
No, that's
He
what
testified that it was 934-6615, according to you.
Correct. And that's what the records show. At no point did the state attorney's office of the Tallahassee Police Department try to get records for that phone. They did, however, try to get records for anything tying to the email address known for Luis Rivera and the information that was provided back. Now, it would be a gross assumption to say that this number was just entered in incorrectly. The number associated with Luis Rivera for Apple is a different...
You're not making any sense. The testimony from Mr. Rivera is that his number is 934. We have phone calls from Ms. McVanoa to that number, so it's relevant.
I would hope that the court would allow us then to enter in the state's evidence that shows that the phone number that he actually had was a different phone number.
Well, you contend that's what it shows. That doesn't That doesn't convince me that that's accurate.
Your Honor, the only thing that I'd add is that for Agent Patrick Sanford that wrote a 302 with the phone number 305, it convinced him.
Well, that's not the testimony before the court. The objection at this point is relevance objection. Overruled the irrelevance objection. Gonna take 5 minutes.
Your Honor, we make it 10 minutes.
Okay. 10 minutes.